Okay. Good evening, everyone. It is evening, at least roughly at this time of year. We're back towards other times, but I wanted to come back to a little bit more of a practical topic for this week, something that you can begin integrating very, very soon if you haven't already. Kashrut, or as people normally call it, keeping kosher. So this is going to end up being a two-parter because there's a lot of just basic information that needs to come out. Not that hard or that complicated. Once you get the basics down, all in pretty routine unless you hit some new situation. But I want to make sure that we know why we're doing it and what those basics are. Okay. Why are we doing it? The Torah's own explanation of why we are doing this, taken from the same section of the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra. I am the Lord your God, self and be holy, for I am holy. For I am the Lord that brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy. So the implication of this is that keeping kosher, that is to say, following the rules that God is putting down in this particular section about what we eat and don't eat, has something to do with our imitation of God's holiness. It has something to do with having us duplicate God's holiness. We have a benefit from from keeping kosher.
I had once looked up holy, and it means to set aside, to
exactly.
be separate.
Right. So holy, to be sanctified, is in both English as well as within Hebrew, connected to the idea to separate and set something aside, to designate as special. This is a concept that we talked about last week with weddings. You are set aside for that person, to that other person. You are made holy to that other person. And with regards to what we are eating, that as we are selective in how we eat, and as we are specifically following what the God who took us out of Egypt told us to eat or not eat, that we are defining our life. We are putting borders on our life that is going to create an atmosphere of holiness. Now, how that holiness works, that there are more details, and that's what we'll move on with. So the first thing to understand, though, is that we are doing this also just because as anyone who has ever been a parent or who's ever been a child of a parent knows, sometimes you do it because that's what your parent said, right? Do it because I said so. And indeed, Rambam in Mishnah Torah says, person to investigate the laws of the Holy Torah and to know their purpose to the best of his abilities. If he does not find a reason or purpose in something, it should not be light in his eyes. He should not reject the commandments because he does not know their reasons. And he should not attribute false ideas to God or think about them as profane matters. So what Rambam is saying here is, yes, it is good and appropriate that when you come across a commandment, you should wonder, why did God give us this commandment? What is the purpose of this commandment? What am I supposed to learn from this? How is this meant to benefit me? How is this meant to benefit the world? Those are all very good questions. Come up with good answers. If you're not satisfied with the answers, you're off the hook. That doesn't mean you should ignore the commandment. The commandments are not, do not require an explanation. They can have an explanation. We can find the reason, but if we miss the reason, if we don't understand it, maybe we're just not ready to understand it yet, do it. And Kashrut is a perfect example of this. Sometimes it may seem unclear why God told us can't eat that. And the whole purpose of that spiritually and physically may be a little mystery, but that doesn't mean that we eat whatever we feel like that. Follow the laws of Kashrut. But we still keep looking for reasons why. So let's look at some of the reasons. So one of them is that it is good for us. And this is going to be a broader idea. It's not that it's just healthy. This is from Abarbanel. He was a Spanish politician and great scholar who lived in the 1500s. And this is what he said. I should believe that the reason for forbidden foods is medicinal. I think that the reason God told us don't eat pork was just because it's medical advice, right? For were it so, the book of God's law would be in the same class as any of the minor brief medical books. Back then, medicine was not really that advanced, and they didn't have big medical books, not like now where you have a medical library that's a whole building. You could become a doctor by studying 12 books. Do you think the Torah is just one of those medical books, a pamphlet on how to eat healthy? New diet fad, the new section in Barnes and Noble about the paleo diet and what? No, right? That is not what the Torah is. I see that people who eat pork and insects and such are healthy at this very day, right? So if it was only about being healthy, that people who don't keep kosher would be sick or would die earlier than us. But Abarbanel knew that you could see somebody over there, you know, the neighbor who's not Jewish, and they're having roast pork, kosher beef, and you both are of basically the same health. So there isn't necessarily something just about the healthiness of the food. That isn't the purpose that God gave us. There are more dangerous animals and poisonous herbs which are not mentioned in the Torah, right? If God was going to tell us how to eat healthy, he should have mentioned hemlock, dangerous plant. But as a matter of fact, as we're going to see, all plants are kosher. Eat poison. It's not mentioned in the Torah. Now, you should know not to eat poison. That hopefully you understand that. But that wasn't the purpose of giving us these laws. It wasn't just health advice for what to eat. God would have mentioned lots of other things that we shouldn't eat that are also dangerous or poison. The conclusion: God did not come to heal bodies and seek their material welfare, but to seek the health of the soul. Illness, right? That keeping kosher is not about making your body healthy, although a healthy body is always a good thing. Kosher is about making your spirit healthy, about keeping your soul healthy. And I think Abarbanel makes a pretty good case for that. Okay. A Guide for the Perplexed. This is from Rambam again in one of his other books. He says, every commandment of the 613 commandments was a true philosophy, a false philosophy, rule of social justice, so that the society is a good and fair society, injustice, so we get rid of some of the problems from bad communities, bestows noble character traits. It makes you a good person. It makes you a better person. Against the evil traits. It keeps you from becoming a bad person. You see that it does at least one of these things. To know immediately which one it's doing, them at least do one of these jobs. That is to say, they either shape what we believe, where we live, personality. All of the commandments do at least one of these. Many of them do more than one. Kashrut is no different, right? Kashrut is not, and many people unfortunately said it very negatively, it's not kitchen Judaism, some old system. Something that changes us, changes our beliefs, and changes our society. All right, Rambam, right, different guy. You can see the N at the end of his name, standing for Nachmanides, or Nachman. He went a little further. Blood is the nefesh of the animal. Nefesh is the Jewish word for spirit or soul. About, as we're going to see, that we don't eat blood. Blood is the spirit of the animal, in which we find its natural instincts. Therefore, we are forbidden to mix animal blood with our blood. Torah, right? God did not give the Torah to bears, God to sheep. God gave the Torah to human beings, and that means the Torah is for us, and there is something special about us that makes us Torah that animals can't. Mixing in the blood of the animals with our body, spirits are getting mixed up. Our instincts are getting mixed up. Our lives have to remain untainted from the lower elements, ruined by contaminated, having this wash into us, we can better comprehend the higher concepts, right? Someone who spends all of their time just watching the worst of the worst TV, really cultivating their mind and their spirit to be able to understand the mysteries of God, is arguing from certain parts of an animal, blood in particular, that you are dumbing yourself down. You are like making yourself like an animal. It's a little controversial, but let's finish what he's saying. Merciful, meaning to animals, to treat them nicely. But if we were to eat blood, our souls would become closer to the animals. Harshness and cruelty. Right? Have you ever seen a tiger look sad after it kills an animal? It's not. Have you ever seen a cat look sad after it kills a mouse or a bird? We have the phrase, the cat who ate the canary. Right? That of a cat looking happy after it's just killed a beautiful bird. Because, you know, cats, they're killers. They actually kill like 1 billion birds every year, they estimate. A lot of birds go down to house cats. What I'm saying is that if you try to take that in, blood, which is that essence of an animal, going to be coarse and cruel like an animal. Doesn't mean that animals, you know, are immoral, only animals, but we are expected to be better than that. And therefore we cannot make our spirit like theirs. We have to be better than them. We can recognize right and wrong. Remember when we ate the fruit in the garden, we took on a different responsibility. Unlike parts of the meat, the blood is not simply digested by the body, but remains as is, and thereby affects the very essence of a person. This is the meaning of the verse, for the nephesh, the spirit of the flesh, is in the blood. A very powerful statement that he's trying to say here. Now, whether or not this is scientifically correct, not that important. What is important is that as people would eat and drain the blood and use it for food, there's a certain coarseness, callousness, cruelty that would come along with those types of practices. Ramban we're seeing, and that's what he's arguing against. Comments? Yes.
It has to be well done, almost.
No. No, we're going to get to how we get rid of the blood to eat. It is not true to be well done. You can have a rare steak or a rare hamburger under Jewish law, and the blood is removed, as is required, before it ever gets to your kitchen. In the old days, if you were a farmer or if you were buying your food freshly killed, you had to do the blood removal yourself. But nowadays, when you go to the supermarket and it's all in the package, taken care of. But we'll get to that when we talk about blood and how we get rid of it in about 15 minutes.
So the little bit that's there is allowable.
It's not actually blood. All right, so this is maybe a good point. But let's save that for when we get to the blood thing, because it's a good question of what does halakha say, what does Jewish law say, and what does the microscope say? Different things. And remember that halakha is not about the microscope, halakha is about the spirit. Follow the rules of the spirit, even if the microscope says something else. So even if the microscope says it's okay, if halakha says no, then we don't. But we'll get to blood in a little bit. Of a more modern rabbi, this is Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. If you don't know him, he was a great rabbi in the 1800s, and he was the founder of modern orthodoxy, the idea of living an orthodox life in the modern world. If his ideas didn't succeed in life of the current Orthodox world, but he has many things that are very amazing to say about how to live a Jewish life in the modern world. Good conservative rabbi. What does he say? Just as the external temple, our holy mission, and to which you should sanctify yourself, becomes desecrated by impurity, foods impure and unfit for your spirit, are all of them the living place of activity, which is summoned unto holiness. You can compare the body to the temple, right? God wasn't in the building. Spirit was felt there, but the building wasn't actually God. The same way that our body isn't actually our soul. Soul shows up. It's where our soul has action. Place has to be kept pure, has to be kept appropriate. Just like the temple had to be kept appropriate. You couldn't bring in idols and you couldn't bring in, things that were ritually unclean. Has to be kept like the temple. Ritually, don't come into this building. It can still do its job. So, not only touch, but absorb them into your system. You've actually taken these things and put them in your mouth, and they become part of your body now. You may be more nourished and better fed, but the animal instinct will be aroused more strongly within you, and your body becomes more blunted as an instrument of spirit. Right? You lose that higher feeling of what it is to be human. Remember way back in Genesis where it says that God created us in God's image. Body, right? That's talking about our spirit is connected to God. No other animal is said to be made in God's image. Only we are. Absorb from the animal, the less human we become, the less spiritual we can be. And that's why this is so strong. Your heart, instead of being holy, instead of only striving for holiness, enmity over everything animal-like is drawn down to the animal or become the more apathetic and dull, faced with a fiercer battle for the fight, which means it makes it harder. Right? The more you have dulled your body, the more you have weakened your body by putting in all these things that aren't kosher, harder it's going to be for you to be spiritual in other ways in Judaism. If you put the wrong gas in the car, it's going to make it hard for the car to do its job. Okay. More explanation. Why? The Rambam argued it was because that was what that other communities ate things in certain ritual ways or for their religion or culture, and we wanted to say, that's not us. And know that blood was very unclean in the eyes of Zaba, which was a type of idol worship back during his days. But nevertheless, believing it was the food of the spirits. I could copy that twice. When one ate it, symbolically joining the spirits and would be able to tell the future. What Rambam was saying is that in their culture, they believed that it gave you magic powers. For us, we want to say we're not believing that kind of magic, witchcraft, superstition stuff. And so another reason not to is to avoid imitating their behaviors. Is that a question or just fixing your hair? Okay. Not the reason why. Right? So there are many reasons that people give nowadays to keep kosher, or why people used to keep kosher, that are wrong. Right? These are not the ones to write down. Say that, oh, the only reason the Torah talks about keeping kosher, they know how to cook pork. And they knew how to cook pork. It's called build a fire. Shellfish, maybe your clams and your oysters and your mussels, and at different times of the year, those can be very, very bad and can make you sick. People knew that. Otherwise, again, as Abarbanel said, if eating this stuff was constantly killing people, eating it, they would have stopped eating it. Poison things. So, no. You'll have a lot of people say that, oh, we only keep kosher because it's a superstition. People think of it as being dirty or somehow it's got bad spirits. Here is not that it's got bad spirits in it. It's the idea that it will shape our spirit to be stronger and better. Because that's what they've always done. That's the only one that I'm a little, well, they keep kosher, but they've never thought about why they keep kosher. habit. Out of habit is better than not keeping kosher. Commandments are supposed to enlighten us. They are supposed to make us and understand God better. Only doing it by habit, then you're kind of missing the benefit from it. It's kind of like if you just say I love you to your husband or wife every day, but you don't think about what you're saying. Yes? Better if you think about what you're saying and mean it when you say it. Good? Good. All right. Let's get to meat of the matter. Thank you. Thank you. I need a little rim shot. Yeah. All right. So first of all, I want to give you a summary, right? Most of what it means to keep kosher is in this one paragraph for the average person. Eat only beasts with cloven hoofs, a foot that has a hoof, you know, like the big nail, the big toe shell nail thing, cut in half all the way through. Right? Anyone here ever look at a horse's foot? Right? Look like. Right? It's all the way around. It's like a U shape. Right? It's like a U shape. That's why we call it a horseshoe. You ever look at a cow's foot? It's got two pieces, side by side. It's split down the middle. So for an animal to be kosher, it has to be split down the middle. Animal to be kosher, it has to chew its cud. Now, not a pleasant idea, but there are certain type of animals called ruminants, word for it, that when they eat food and it sits in their stomach for a while, and then it comes up into their mouth again, that's called chewing the cud. And then they go back into the stomach, and some of them do it a couple times. Cows, what are cows always doing? They're not chewing the fresh grass, stuff that's already in their stomach that comes back in their mouth again. That's, yeah. But for cows, it's perfectly normal. Kosher, that lives on the land, those two features. It has to have the right feet and the right chewing. Good? Not so hard. Also have to have their blood drained, and certain fats and sciatic nerves are removed. Those two things we're going to talk about next week. Just ran out of time for my class tonight. When it comes to birds, not mentioned on the short list of forbidden ones, is okay after proper slaughter and preparation. Birds are kosher birds. Fish with scales, the part of a fish, and scales have to be real scales, meaning like if you've ever handled a fish, anyone here ever been fishing? Take a fish out of the water, and you take the fish and you put it in your bucket. These little, right? Those are real scales. A shark, a manta ray, touch one or you pick one up, because their skin is not scales. Their skin is like leather almost. It feels like sandpaper. Some of it's smooth, some of it's rough, but one sheet. It's not little tiny scales. Same thing with like whales and dolphins. They don't have scales. Fins and scales, the fish is good. If it's missing one or the other, no good. So this is where we get rid of things like lobster and clams and all of those things. And certain types of locusts, everybody's favorite, right? That's like a type of giant grasshopper. We're going to go through this in more detail, but this is the general list. Plants and minerals, so your salt or your broccoli, no problem. And also, we don't mix meat and milk. We're going to talk about this just a little bit tonight, meat and milk more next week, and about what that does for your kitchen setup. That's it, right? Is that so complicated? Is that too hard? No, but let's listen why we do it and what it means. So keeping kosher is really a bundle of different mitzvot. It's not like one mitzvah. Mitzvot. when it comes to keeping kosher. It has its own details, its own source, and its own meaning, and its own need to know. To know what are the kosher species, fish, bird, and animals. You also know how to prepare them, how to cook them. And we're going to talk, like I said, more about the fat and gid hanashe, that's the sciatic nerve, next week. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the cooking milk next week. Good? Okay, so let's get down to it. From my little list here, plant, bug, fish, bird, animal, there's kind of a chain, a kind of aisle that is connected. And there's a general rule. The more complicated, the higher the level of life, the harder it is to make it kosher and eat it. Something is just a plant or even a rock like salt. It up, you make sure it's got no bugs on it, you eat it. We're done. If something is actually moving around and living, well, then there are a few requirements. So for example, fish and the type of bugs we can eat, kind. But if it's the right kind, blood, you don't have to worry about how you kill them. You can technically take a fish out of the water and just, it's called sushi. Thank you. Actually, in Japan, they do serve fish sometimes like that, where they will take it out of a tank, they will cut it open, take out the guts, and then they'll put the fish still sort of moving, and people can, just pull the meat off of it. What's that?
But it's fine to eat it like that?
It is technically kosher, yes. But it may not be nice, and you may be, and that's okay. You don't have to eat it. Technically kosher to eat fish like that. It's not kosher to eat other animals like that. But technically for that, or the same thing for locusts. You could technically take the right kind of locust and little legs and and that's kosher, right? So notice that keeping kosher doesn't mean that you're going to be happy. Some of these things don't make people happy. Birds, right, are more advanced still than fish and insects. And therefore, we have a smaller number that we can eat, and there are more rules about how we prepare them. Actual animals like cows and sheep and dogs and cats, the circle gets even smaller. There's almost nothing. Most of the animals on Earth we can't eat. They're not kosher. We're kind of lucky now because we live in North America and our supermarkets don't have a lot of the other animals. If you lived in some place like China, Africa, the market would have many more choices. But for us, most of the things that we can eat are in our supermarkets, although most of them have not been prepared properly, which we don't eat, right? But we do parts. You ever see a baby eat? What's a baby eating?
Oh, no, milk.
The milk from the mother, right? So there is a little bit of a loophole there, but it's an exception. Eat people. Good? That's just important that everyone knows we don't eat people because they're not officially on the list.
We don't chew the cud and we don't have a split hoof.
We don't chew the cud and we don't have a split hoof. Exactly right. And in fact, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, they discuss we are classified as an animal back in Genesis 2. So we are an animal and we're not properly built. So yeah, no human on the menu. And then there's the whole problem of killing a human, which would be murder. So that's also an issue. Minor details. About the biggest category, plants, that we're most likely. So in Genesis, it says, when God has made the human beings, he said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. Food is the first thing that God recommends that we eat, are plants. So this is, and has been for most of our human history, the bulk of our diet. It's come from plants. For most of history, that was bread or rice, depending upon which part of the world you lived in. But it's still vegetables, fruits, and grains are the biggest source of our calories in our life, even to this day. It's nice because all plants are by themselves kosher. Things like that, but the plant itself, if other ingredients have been added beyond salt, then you got to check, right? So this is coming to the supermarket question. And someone is selling candied broccoli, that the candy that they put on the broccoli doesn't have a dye that comes from a bug, which, by the way, is common. The dyes that are used for candies come from. That's how they get them that nice bright red color.
Oh, the cherry.
Yeah. So that's why we check. So if they got extra ingredients on it, then we have to be extra careful. But if it's just a lump of cauliflower sitting in the produce section and it's got no bugs on it, that one's simple. You can eat. Right? People always seem surprised by this, but that just means you weren't paying attention when you read the Torah. You shall not eat among all the things that swarm on the earth, that's belly, or anything that walks on four, or anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. So you might be thinking, all right, I'm not eating any of these things. Now, this does, by the way, rule out things like mosquitoes and snakes and other mice and weasels and stuff like that. Leviticus, it says, but these you may eat among all the swarming things that walk on all fours, have above their feet jointed legs with to leap on the ground, the locusts of every variety, all varieties of bald locust, crickets, not critics, don't eat your critics, crickets of every variety, and all varieties of grasshopper. Now, if you can run out and go, find these things. Some locusts are kosher. The exact knowledge is only known to a few Jewish communities and experts. For example, if you were to put a plate of locusts in front of me, I'll tell you that one's kosher, that one isn't. Eating the locust. They're still kosher, but most people do not. And so you can rely on an expert if you find an expert. And indeed, there's a guy who does a big thing every year called the kosher banquet, exotic kosher food, and he will bring in kosher food that people never get to eat. And he's an expert, so he's sure that they're the kosher ones. But locusts at Temple Israel, I'm sorry, we're not going to have it. Disappointed?
No.
Yeah, well,
Crunchy, those things.
well, I should point out that this may become more important over the next 50 years, because as we have discovered that when you have billions and billions of people, cows for all of them can create a lot of land use problems, because cows need a lot of land, they need a lot of water, and they cause a lot of waste. The cows, right? And you want to give them a good life, it's very hard for the environment to have enough cows for everybody. Protein. And meat is the best way to get protein, in my own opinion. And so a lot of people have begun experimenting with crickets, because you can raise crickets in a warehouse. Level after level of crickets on little racks. And you put them through a grinder, and you turn them into a mush. Cricket bars and cricket paste and all sorts of things. Now, we're all going, ew. But imagine the ability to get cheap people all over the world. Giant sections of, Iowa, but can actually be done in a downtown area. And then you can get it to the people who live in that area very quickly, very cheaply, very easily. Think of what that would do for human health, to be able to give them that resource. Well, you can eat beans, but you still need more land to grow the beans on. Now, and the great thing is if they get the right species and they do it the right way, it could be kosher. One day you may find a kosher cricket bar. Doesn't mean you have to eat it. Doesn't mean you have to eat it, but you should know that it is very possible to be kosher.
Taste it first, and I'll watch your reaction. Then me. What do they do?
They have all sorts of different ways of trying to prepare it. It doesn't have to be cooked. Some of them are cooked. I'm not excited about eating bugs either. I personally prefer lamb and beef and other things, but I can see that this might be very helpful to billions of people around the world. So an open mind, and remember that our own disgust is because we just don't like the idea, right? This is just our culture, right? We're not used to it. So with us eating locusts, so why do we have a problem with someone else eating them? Eat them, that's fine. Yeah, but don't make a face of them. All right, fish. Like I said, fish are also pretty straightforward. Again, from Leviticus, all that live in the water. Anything in the water, whether in the seas or in the streams, that has fins and scales, needs both. These you may eat. In the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of the water and among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination to you. We don't eat those things. This is why Jews don't have lobster, Jews don't have oysters, Jews don't have eel, Jews don't eat whale, dolphin, fish, shark, right? So catfish and shark are very common in many restaurants because their skin is skin. It's not scales. They are off the list. And you have to update your knowledge of fish because there is a fish farm industry, and they will get species of fish that will grow fat, and then they start farming them. And oftentimes they will give them new names, a good name for the menu. And so you have to keep checking. If you see a new name of a fish on a menu, I have to look it up, and don't just assume because it says fish that it's actually a fins and scales fish. It is. Stay away from it. Stick with a nice trout or bass. Those are good, nice fish. Grouper's nice. Yep, tilapia. Snapper's good. Salmon, of course, is lovely, especially lox. Right. One little thing that often comes up as a question is swordfish. People have heard that swordfish isn't kosher. That's not true. Swordfish is kosher. There's a story behind swordfish. When the swordfish was first being discovered, because it's a new world fish, from what I understand. It wasn't something that people used to eat all the way back in the days of the Mishnah and the Talmud. When it was first being discovered, the adult versions, which are so amazing and beautiful. And of course, the first rabbis who saw it said, the skin is skin, it's not scales, not kosher. It turns out young swordfish, and when you read the discussion in the Talmud about scales for fish, they explain very clearly, fish has scales during its life, so swordfish is technically kosher. Never updated their knowledge of swordfish, and so many people still don't eat it. Good. Yeah.
Is giraffe kosher?
We're getting there.
Oh, okay.
We're not on land animals yet. Take care of the birds. Things in the air, which, by the way, is the better way of describing this, because as you can see on the list, and bats aren't birds, and our ancestors knew they weren't birds. They were not so crazy as to think that a bat was a type of bird. We think that's something that spends most of its time flying around, and that puts it in this category. There is a list of things we don't eat. Right? It actually tells us very clearly, these, no, everything else, okay. Following, you shall abominate, that means don't eat them, among all the birds. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, hoopoe, and the bat. People know all those birds on sight.
Does this include their eggs?
Yes. Anything from the bird, anything from any animal that isn't kosher, you don't eat any of their products. Obviously, you wouldn't have horse milk, or you wouldn't eat like pig skin, meat. It's anything, any product that comes from an animal Ostrich eggs, snake eggs. Nope. The eggs of lobsters that are from inside their belly and all of that. Nope, we don't eat those. They gotta come from a kosher animal for them to be kosher food. So because most of us don't know all of these birds, and there's actually a debate about some of these, of whether it's a particular species or a whole category, we follow the practice that we're not sure about. Simply means that the birds that you're going to see in a regular supermarket are all the normal birds. You're going to find chicken, and you're going to find duck, and you're going to find turkey, and you're going to find things like that. Those are all fine. Walking down the street and you see a wild bird, it's probably best not to just go run up and grab it and try to eat it. Again, for us nowadays, this isn't such a big issue because most of us don't try and find and kill our own food. But in the ancient world, and even up just 200 years ago, bigger issue. You throw out a net to catch a bird. What is this bird? Is this bird kosher or not? You had to be more knowledgeable. And there are people who do know that knowledge. And if you ever wanted to become a bird trapper, that's fine. I can tell you who to talk to. It's not needed.
Culture?
What?
Is lionfish kosher?
I believe that lionfish is kosher because I believe it does have fins and scales, but I can't promise that. It's not about whether it's weird or not. It's about how it's built. So you can eat ugly fish like a halibut.
It doesn't look like it has scales from just looking at it.
Well, most fish, some fish have like really bright, flashy scales, but some fish just have dull scales that aren't really noticeable. I saw a halibut. Which my uncle, who was a marine biologist, he used to raise them in tanks to do experiments. Right? It's flat, right? And both their eyes are on one side. So they lay on the bottom of the ocean and they have two eyes on one side of their body, and it's kosher. It's weird, but it's kosher. Flounder is also the same way. Yes, yeah, flounder and halibut are very similar. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about things on the land, however. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. True hoof with clefts through the hoofs. Remember, that's what we talked about, the feet. And the chews the cud. Such you may eat. Very simple. Very short list, at least for most things that we eat. So, for example, in the okay category, deer. These are all kosher. Right now, you're not going to find a lot of giraffe at your local supermarket, but a giraffe is technically a kosher species of animal. They chew their cud and they have a cloven hoof. Me? No.
That's a lot of meat.
They are big animals and they are kosher, but I think people have figured out that cows and sheep are more economical to raise. So, I mean, if the only thing, you need a very long ladder to do the slaughtering. In the not okay category, and these are all things that people eat in either this country or elsewhere in the world: horses, dogs, rabbits, cats, squirrels, guinea pigs. Not kosher. But they don't have cloven hoofs. Their feet aren't the right feet. Right. So actually, camels and pigs are famous. Two of the signs, because pigs have the right feet, don't chew their cud. Well, that's actually the old joke, is that between pigs and camels, if you've ever seen the way they sit, when a pig sits, it puts its feet out, kosher, but it's not chewing its cud. Sit. They fold their feet under, but they chew the cud and spit so that you think they're kosher because they're hiding their feet. So it's kind of a joke about the behavior of the animals. So now that we found, what do we do with it? How do we prepare it? Because it's not just a question of, I've got a cow. It has to go from being a living animal with a number of other steps. And this is why, this step in particular, why when you go to the supermarket, you're going to see there the meat and the poultry, even if it comes from a kosher animal, right? You can go into Winn-Dixie's, you can go into Publix, and there's a nice, lovely steak, comes from a cow. not kosher. Why? Because it wasn't killed according to the laws of Torah. Number one reason. So how do we know? Well, first of all, it says, you shall be holy people to me. You must not eat the flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. Torn flesh is where the term treif comes from. You may have heard that used as being not kosher. Torn. And the idea here is that, imagine you're a shepherd, you go out to your field, and you find your sheep, and a wolf was there last night. It's been torn and dead. That's money, right? That's food lying there. We're not allowed to pick up the sheep and eat it. Predator, it's dead. And also if it was, as we're going to see, killed by a disease, it's dead. Anything that has died a natural death. Give it to the stranger in your community to eat, or you may sell it to a foreigner. Cow just gets really, really, really old, and then one day, dead. That's not dinner. That's gone. You can sell the body to someone else, eat it. Right? An animal that dies of natural causes is not kosher. An animal, in fact, we have to inspect inside to make sure it wasn't suffering condition, that the animal wasn't going to die soon. So if you find an animal that looks healthy, you slaughter it, you open it up, and whoa, cancer, then that's not dinner. To die anyway. It's what you would call a dead cow walking. Right? It was dead, it just hadn't fallen over yet. So, these two things make a big problem because many animals are killed to tear them, or many animals, even if they die from a natural cause, will still be sent into the slaughterhouse. And let's imagine the animal is not killed by a wolf. It's not tears it and ruins it, but maybe they just, right? Or maybe they take a big axe and just shunk, chop off the head. Still not kosher. Why? Because, as Deuteronomy makes clear, if the place where the Lord has chosen to establish his name is too far from you, that means the temple, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that the Lord gives you, as I have instructed you, meaning there is a special way to kill an animal. That's Torah. And you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements. So you don't have to go to Jerusalem every time you want to have a hamburger. Animal, you do have to kill it in the way that God has told us to kill animals. We can't just kill it with a gun. You can't just kill it by, throwing it off a building. You have to kill it in a very special way. And that's what we call shchita, the special form of slaughter, of killing an animal to make the animal kosher. A little bit. This actually comes from Shechita UK, which is an organization that promotes the ritual slaughter in the UK, and they have a lovely little pamphlet that answers a lot of questions about it. And their summary is one of the best ones I've seen, so I have borrowed it, but check out more of their information for more detail. Halachic requirements that the shochet, that's the person who does the slaughter, is obliged to ensure in the performance of shechita, of doing the slaughter. Taken from Shulchan Aruch, which is, of course, a very good summary. No interruption of the incision, right? Cutting the animal's neck. Right? It has to be one motion. You can't back and forth and hack and it has to be just one slice with motion. I should point out, by the way, that all of these are necessary so that when the slice happens, the blood falls out of the animal's head and it is unconscious instantly. Has no time to react to the cut, but is gone because you've been finished. And then a little more, and a little more. And that's just not nice. This is meant to, as we talked at the very beginning, to ensure that as we take a life, we are doing it in a perfectly humane way. So, slice of the knife, requirement number one. Pressing of the chalaf, that's the knife. This would exclude the use of an axe, hatchet, or guillotine, right? So you're not just able to take the knife and have to, it has to be a slicing motion, not just into the animal. It has to be that smooth, perfect motion. And the knives are incredibly sharp, surgically sharp. They're constantly being honed, sharpened, and tested to make sure that they are as sharp as possible for a blade. The knife should not be covered by the hide of cattle, the wool of sheep, or the feathers of birds, and therefore the chalaf has to be of adequate length. So you got a little tiny knife, really big cow. Right? How can you possibly cut, disappear under the folds of the cow's skin? Make it hard to see where you're cutting, and possibly ruin the slaughter. So the knife has to be long enough, so you have different length knives for different types of animals. Incision can be done properly. 4, the incision must be at the appropriate site to sever the major structures and vessels at the neck. Cut it too high, because then the arteries and the veins go back in. You're going to hit the bone. It has to be at just the right spot to make sure that as you go through, you hit everything that needs to go. Again, good. And there must be no tearing of the vessels before or during the shechita process. And this is, again, why the knife has to be razor sharp. Shave with it. So that as it goes through, it doesn't have any nicks, no serrated knives. It has to be just one small, perfectly smooth edge. Good. And they have done tests where if you take animals, you put them so that their head is resting on something, and you do shechita on them, they just fall. Right? They don't struggle, they don't move, they don't react. It's 1 minute they are alive and fine, and the next minute they're gone. Or next second, I should say, they are gone. I've never seen any of the videos of how slaughter is done in non-kosher slaughterhouses pleasant. I'm not going to go into the details because we're running out of time, but you can look up for more information if you like. Okay, blood. Let's see if we can rush through this. So you must not consume any blood, either of bird or of animal, in any of your settlements. Anyone who eats blood shall be cut off from his skin, what we call karet, which is considered one of the worst spiritual punishments there is. Leviticus, but that same rule is repeated in Genesis, elsewhere in Leviticus, and also in Deuteronomy. It's almost like God is trying to make a point. Blood. And that means after you have slaughtered these animals, all the large vessels, like the aorta and big blood vessels, moved. After the blood has drained out, you let the blood drain from the animal, then you remove these big veins and arteries, and the meat then, and soaked to remove the rest. Boiling with proper rinsing of the blood that bubbles up out of the meat, that can also work. And in fact, that's the only way that you can do liver. We get chopped liver as the Jewish food, is you broil the liver, and then after it's broiled, you chop it up. So, question about blood, foam tray. Once you have properly done the salting and the washing of the meat, kind is not considered blood for the purposes of halakha. It may be blood under a microscope, but it's not blood under halakha. And that's a very important point, because the microscope to check everything we're going to eat. What about there? What about there? What about there? We would have to search every cell of the meat to eat it, which would be an impossible burden, not only for us, but would have been much more impossible 500 years ago. If we have done everything we can to remove the blood, then we have followed the mitzvah as God has given it to our ability to be able to follow. By the way, this is also why, if you've ever been to the supermarket, you've probably seen kosher salt. Kosher salt means, doesn't mean the salt is kosher. Salt is kosher. It's a rock. It's not a food. Nice, but it's not really food. Is the right size salt, because you put the salt all around the meat, like a sponge pulls the blood out of the meat, wipe it off and rinse it off and all of that. Because if the salt is too small, then it just dissolves. And if the salt is too big, it doesn't get in close and suck it up. Salt is the right size salt. Good, good. So once this has happened, and now the meat's ready, and you can cook it however you like. Eat your meat rare. If you want to eat your meat well done, go for it. Once the blood has been removed prior to cooking, entirely up to you. Question.
So if I go hunting, eat the meat?
You cannot eat the meat. Right? You can go fishing. You can catch birds with like a net. Learn how you can do the proper slaughter. But catching a deer, you can catch a deer with a trap, net, and then you can do the slaughter. But like bow and arrow or rifle, nope, not allowed to eat it. If you're starving to death and you're about to die, of course, all of these rules are out the window. People of that. But hunting, when you've got plenty of food at home, plenty of food in the supermarket, and there's no zombies chasing you, then no. You're not allowed to shoot an animal and eat it. The fact that most authorities say the animal, you're not allowed to kill it just for fun. And so sport hunting, just I want to go shoot a deer, but I'm not going to eat it. Questionable at the least in Jewish law.
You're going to sell the meat. You cannot do
it. Technically, yes, you can if you're going to sell the meat, because as we saw before, an animal that dies from other causes, you can sell to somebody that's not Jewish. And it's no longer sport. Now it's a job. It wouldn't be what people want to do on the weekend. In general, sport hunting is not something that Jews engage in if they take Kashrut seriously, because of how we treat animals. Go for it.
There's actually a person that kills a giraffe the proper way. Yes, there are shochets that know how to do a proper giraffe slaughter. Yeah. Meat and milk. We're just going to touch on this idea, and then we're going to go into more detail next week. Deuteronomy, you shall not boil a kid. Kid means a baby goat, not a human. Right? Kid is a baby goat. Kid in its mother's milk. Deuteronomy, and also Exodus, and also Exodus again. It gets mentioned 3 times in the Torah. Shulchan Aruch points out, baby goat. It is the same rule with ox, sheep, and goat. If it is the milk of the mother or another domesticated animal, I thought I put that on mute. Rather, the common case. So what? Let's mute it on this as well. Mute. Okay, so what this is trying to say is that although the Torah speaks in the case of a kid in its actual mother's milk, using that as an example of a normal way of cooking a particular type of food in the ancient world. People would often take a baby goat and they'd cook it in the mother's milk. That was just what you did. It was a normal dish. Trying to tell us not to cook any meat. Relationship between the animals, and it's not about goats only. It is for any animal from any milk. Don't cook. We don't have them together. We don't have cheeseburgers. We have chicken parmesan. We can't have chicken parmesan. Chickens don't give milk. Exactly right. Yes, but lasagna is another classic example. Although anyone who wants a really amazing vegetarian lasagna recipe should talk to my wife.
Oh, yes.
She has a very good vegetarian lasagna recipe. Okay, so birds and milk. What's going on here? This is something that people just always come up to me and rant about. It's like if anybody has anything they ever want to complain about keeping kosher, it's always the birds and milk thing. Okay, so let's talk about it just a little bit tonight, and then we're going to wrap it up. Take out birds and milk according to rabbinic law. So we are agreeing right? The rabbis say, it doesn't say don't eat birds and milk in the Torah. The rabbi said, don't do it either, so that people at large will not be negligent and come to violate the scriptural prohibition. They were very worried, used to eating bird meat and milk, that they would accidentally come to eat other types of meat with milk. Now, I'm not going to make a mistake, right? My chicken breast, my steak, oh, I've been eating this with a piece of cheese. I'm going to eat that by mistake. This is modern. This is not what meat looked like for most people for most of our history. One of these comes from a bird.
Oh, the one on the right.
Yeah.
The one on the right.
What bird?
Do you have any idea what bird? And do you know what's on the? Do you know what the other side is? If you're saying right.
No,
But that looks like
The
beef
beef
cow.
cow.
Looks like
Looks like beef.
Oh,
lamb
like
or
beef.
cow.
Yeah, they're both.
What about these?
Well,
You might be able to make a guess, right? But anybody here 100% sure?
No. No.
Anyone here 100% sure, willing enough to risk a commandment?
usually chicken though is pale.
No, chicken is a very modern bird, right? It comes from Polynesia, from the South Pacific, so, Indochina, and it's relatively recent as far as domesticated animals go. Right? People ate duck, right? Duck or pheasants or quails or game birds, which was all dark and meaty and flaky, not white-breasted chickens. And also, they didn't usually eat these beautifully red marbled steaks because cows were really expensive. A little piece of lamb. And usually if you had lamb, you didn't just have pieces of lamb like that. It was going to be cooked up like this. So ground duck. So pieces here, you know, that's if you were lucky, you got a few pieces of meat in your stew. Giant steak. And so a few pieces of lamb versus a few pieces of duck or pheasant, different. And there really is a problem of confusing these two. I believe that our rabbis were very, very clever in recognizing that this was a real concern and real problem. And to speak to the modern world, chicken parmesan is not such a big issue in order to keep kashrut as it has always been kept for at least the last 1,500 years. The last major argument about this was about 1,500 years ago. It said, you know what, we're just taking chicken off the milk menu.
But there's nothing in the Torah that actually says.
Absolutely not.
Mix those two.
Right, as Rambam says, rabbinic. It is a rabbinic law, rabbinic protection. Mix those two. The Torah itself does not. So that is important to know. The rabbis were always 100% clear when they were making a fence. They never wanted people to be confused between what was the rabbinic fence and what was the actual Torah. They want people to know that. There's no trickery here, no hiding, no pretending that they're actually the Torah, because we're not making new Torah laws, but sometimes we do have to make protections so that we don't step on the Torah law. It's the same reason that they put up those ropes at museums. And think that you're going to run up and grab the statue, right, trip and hit the statue. So they put the rope so that you stay a few steps back.
About the chicken and the milk. In the days before cell phones, I used to teach my children, the rabbi may not go into McDonald's to make a phone call, because if people see the rabbi going into McDonald's, they might think it's okay to eat there. So even to make a phone call, you're not eating a thing.
Yeah.
You may not go into a McDonald's. And
unless it's an emergency. There's a whole long discussion about, yes.
Just ordinarily, you have to find someplace
And-
else
and-
because of what it looks like.
One of the other solutions often was if there was an emergency, like let's imagine you're with a small child and the small child needs a bathroom and the only place is a McDonald's, where the rabbi doesn't get a choice not to go. It's that, or the child is. You can take your kippah off, you put a baseball cap, but you would want to do something to prevent from misleading other people. Our actions, not just rabbis, but any Jew, our actions are used as reference points by other people. Kashrut is one place where that is. So There is definitely a concern here to make mistakes, and the concern this, right? That picture is false for most of our history. For most of our history, this is what people were facing. It's a real issue that needed to be protected, and so this is how it came to be. We're going to talk more about the general meat and milk prohibition and how that affects cooking. Bits that we have to remove, the fats and the gita nashe, the sciatic nerve, and we're going to talk about what a kosher kitchen looks like and how it works.
All right,
Thank you for coming.